Hello and welcome to our first Zoom session for English. I thought I would do it like this so you could still see me and we could talk about the things that we would have been doing this term and read some of the books that we would have been doing this term and do some of the work that we'll be doing this term. So I hope you're all okay, and we're going to get started on the book that we're doing first, which is called Tangerine, a book that I'm going to start reading to you in a minute. Okay, so we're going to have a quick talk about some of the things to do with the book rather than start to read the book straight away, because our topic this term is the sport in life. So we're going to do lots of things on different sports, and this book is called Tangerine. And first of all, we're going to have a quick look at the book cover. So have a look at this. See what you think about this book cover. Have a think about the colours, the images that are on there. What are we looking at? And have a quick write down about what you think will happen in this book. Okay, hopefully you paused then, otherwise you're going to hear me talking, but if you didn't, pause it now, finish your writing, and then we're going to talk about what I think about the front cover. Hopefully it's the same as what you think. Okay, well, if you have a quick look at the front of the book, the first colour I see is the colour sort of orangey, sort of yellowy. And I suppose that links to the fruit that we're talking about here, a tangerine. But as you'll find out in this book, it's not just about a fruit called a tangerine, it's about a place called Tangerine. And also in this picture, we can see a boy. We think it's a boy because it's got really, really short hair, could be a girl. And I can see some glasses on that person. So it makes me think maybe they can't see very well, or maybe they find it difficult to see. The fact that they're wearing glasses when they're playing sport must mean that they really need them. And I can tell that the sport that he's playing or she's playing is football, because obviously they're in goal and they're catching the ball. They've got a football kit on, so that gives me a clue about what sort of sport this is going to be. Okay, we're now going to move on to the blurb, which is the writing that goes on the back of the book. This is the book I've got here, and this is the writing that's on the back. I've made it a little bit bigger so that you can have a quick read of it. So what I think you should do now is pause the video and then read through this, and then see if you can answer this question for me. What words stand out in this, and what things do you think make people want to read this book? So I'm going to read the blurb now, then pause the video and see if you can answer that question for me. Write it down in full sentences. Welcome to Tangerine. This place is weirder than it looks. Paul Fisher sees the world from behind glasses, so thinks he looks like a bug-eyed alien. But he's not so blind that he can't see there are some very unusual things about his family's new home in Tangerine County, Florida. Where else does a sinkhole swallow the local school, fire burn underground for years, and lightning strike at the same time every day? With all this chaos compounded by constant harassment from his football star brother, adjusting to life in Tangerine isn't easy for Paul until he joins a soccer team at his middle school. With the help of his new teammates, Paul discovers what lies beneath the surface of this strange new hometown. And he also gains the courage to face up to some secrets his family have been keeping for him for far too long. In Tangerine, it seems anything is possible. So have a think, pause the video here and think about what words stand out in this and what things you want to make you want to read the book. Okay, so I think that the main thing is the name, Tangerine. It's a funny name, isn't it? Because we think of it as a fruit, but Tangerine is a place. And in this blurb, it tells us that that place is in Florida, which is in America. Okay, the other things that stand out for me is that this boy, Paul, wears glasses, and he thinks he looks like a bug-eyed alien, which probably means he doesn't think very much of himself. He thinks that he looks like an alien. There's lots of interesting things here going on in this town when they moved to it. Sinkhole swallowing the whole school, fire burning underground for years, lightning striking at the same time every day. Well, lightning is only meant to strike in one place once ever. It's meant to be really rare to strike in the same place every day. So that's very strange, isn't it? And then in the second bit, it says about his brother, who is a football star. And I think football in this case doesn't mean like our football. I think it means like American football, because this book is set in America. Okay, and it says that they don't seem to get on because he's getting constant harassment. Harassment is another sort of word for somebody annoying you all the time. So it doesn't sound like they get on very well, just on what we're reading here. And then at the bottom it says that his family have been keeping secrets from him. So it sounds like there's going to be a lot of discoveries in this book and things that we're going to find out. So it does sound quite an interesting book. So I hope you picked up on some of those things. Okay, I'm going to read the prologue to the book now. And then I'm going to ask you some questions. So the prologue is the first bit, and it sort of introduces the book. And this first bit of prologue is called Out of Focus. I was standing at the back of a line of kids waiting to board the bus for one of the first days at kindergarten. I would be accompanied by no one except Eric, my 5th grade brother. But Eric did not accompany me for long. He was standing at the front of the school bus line with his 5th grade friends when one of them turned, made a gesture and called to me, "Hey, Eclipse boy, how many fingers am I holding up?" I didn't realise at first that the boy was talking to me, and I had no idea what he meant. Eric and his friends laughed about the joke. Then the bus doors opened and we all filed in. I can't put all of the details in order now, but it became clear to me later that for some reason the big kids on the school bus were calling me Eclipse boy. The fact is, we did have an eclipse that summer, around 3 weeks before school started. Based on that, Eric was telling his friends this story. The reason for the Coke bottle glasses on my eyes was that I had stared at the sun, unprotected, during that eclipse. The story puzzled me then, and it puzzles me now. I do not remember doing any such thing. And yet, when I search through our family photos, I can see that I never wore glasses of any kind before that summer. Okay, going to the next bit of the prologue. And this is about him moving house. The house looked strange. It was completely empty now, and the door was flung wide open, like something wild had just escaped from it, like it was the empty 2-story tomb of some runaway zombie. Mum called out to me, "Take the bag, Paul. I want to have one last look around." I said, "I just did. I didn't see anything." "Well, maybe you didn't look everywhere. I'll just be a minute." I looked everywhere. "Wait for me out by the car, please. We can't have the new owners thinking we left a mess behind." I picked up the garbage bag and hauled it out to the curb. We'd already packed up our sleeping bags, suitcases and 2 folding chairs, all neatly wedged into the back of Mum's Volvo. Now, only this 10-gallon, self-tying, lemon-scented garbage bag remained, and we planned to tot it into the dumpster behind the 7-Eleven. But first, Mum had to make sure that I didn't overlook anything. She was worried that the people who bought our house, people who'd never met us, would find a McDonald's swizzle stick and think less of us. Once we dump this garbage bag, that'll be it. That will be the last evidence that the Fisher family ever lived in Houston. Dad and my brother Eric had already gone. They'd been living in Florida for a week now with their sleeping bags, suitcases and chairs that they'd stuffed into Dad's Range Rover. The rest of our furniture left yesterday, professionally packed by 2 guys who came to really hate Mum. By now, it should be over halfway to our new address, a place called Lake Windsor Downs in Tangerine County, Florida. I set the garbage bag down and leaned against the station wagon, staring east, directly into the rising sun. I'm not supposed to do that because my glasses are so thick. My brother Eric once told me that if I ever looked directly into the sun with these glasses, my eyeballs would burst into flames like dry leaves under a magnifying glass. I don't believe that. But I turned back around anyway, and I looked west down our street at the receding line of black mailboxes. Something about them fascinated me. I leaned my chin against the top of the station wagon and continued to stare. An old familiar feeling came over me, like I'd forgotten something. What was it? What does I need to remember? Somewhere behind me, a car engine started up and a scene came back to me. I remembered a black metal mailbox on a black metal pole. I was riding my bike home at dinner time, heading east down this street with the sun setting behind me. I heard a loud roar like an animal's, like a predator snarling. I swiveled my head around, still pedaling, and looked back. All I could see was the red sun, huge now, setting right over the middle of the street. I couldn't see anything else, but I could hear the roar, even louder now, and I recognised it. The roar of an engine revved up to full throttle. I tilted up my sports goggles to unfog them, then I turned back and saw it, a black car, just an outline at first, then clear and detailed. It came right out of the sun. I saw a man hanging out of the passenger window, hanging way out. He had something pulled over his face like some kind of ski mask, and he was holding a long metal baseball bat in both hands, like a murder weapon. Then the gears ground, the tyres squealed, and the car leaped forward at an impossible speed. I swiveled back, terrified, and pedalled as hard as I could. I heard the roar of the car closing in on me, louder and louder, like it had smelled its prey. I shot a glance into my bike mirror, and there it was, half a block behind, then 10 yards, then 1 yard. The man in the ski mask leaned farther out the window. He pulled the bat back and up, and he brought it forward in a mighty swing right at my head. I dove to the right, landing on my face in the grass, just as the baseball bat smashed into the mailbox, exploding it right off its pole. Voices inside the car screamed, animal fury screams, as the crushed black metal clattered across the street. I scrambled back up. I left my bike there, its wheels spinning, and ran for home. I ran in absolute terror, listening for the sound of the car squealing back around to come around after me again. I burst for the front door, crying hysterically. My goggles were twisted back around my head. I spun around and looked for my mum. Then Mum and Dad were both in front of me, holding onto my shoulders, trying to calm me down, trying to understand the words that I was saying over and over. It was Eric, I was saying. Eric! Dad finally understood. He looked right into my eyes and asked, "What do you mean by Eric? Eric what, Paul?" I stammered out, "Eric, he tried to kill me." Mum and Dad let go of my shoulders and stepped back. They looked at each other, puzzled. Then Dad raised his arm up and pointed to the right into the dining room. There was Eric. He was sitting at the dining room table. He was doing his homework. Dad eyeballed me for a few seconds, then he went out front to look for my bike. Eric called over, "There he goes again, blaming me again." Mum took me into the kitchen and got me a glass of water. She ran her finger under the strap of my goggles and slipped them off. Then she said, "Honey, you know how it is with your eyesight. You can't see very well." And that was that. But I can see. I can see everything. I can see things that Mum and Dad can't or won't. Mum's voice broke into remembrance. "Paul?" My chin was still pressed against the car. She was standing next to me. "Paul, are you okay? Are you with us?" I leaned back as she beeped the auto alarm and opened the tailgate. "You're remembering all the good times you had here, aren't you?" I shook my head to clear it. I reached to pick up the garbage bag. My arms felt weak. I muttered, I was remembering something that happened." She held up a white cigarette butt and said, "You don't know anything about this, do you?" "No. I found it in the garage behind the water heater." I opened up the garbage bag enough for her to slip it inside. I said, "Good work, Mum." She walked quietly back up to the house, laid her keys inside the foyer, and pulled the door firmly closed. And that was that. The keys were locked in. The zombie was locked out, and we were on our way. Okay, so that's the end of the prologue. I'm going to share the screen here so you can see the questions. By the way, this PowerPoint is going to be available on DB Primary as well, so you can go back and have a look at it if you want to. But what I would do now is pause your video, take some time, have a look at these questions. So the questions are, number one, what is an eclipse? Why shouldn't you look at one? That's what Paul did. Okay. How do we know that this book is set in America? From the language. Try and think of some of the language I was using there and see if you can pick up on some of the words that are different to ours. And number three, describe the incident with the shattered mailbox. And a mailbox is like a post box, but in America they have it on poles outside their house. Do you think Eric was to blame? Do you think Paul was imagining it? Okay, so now pause the video. See if you can answer the questions in full sentences. and then we'll go back over this in one moment. Okay, so what is an eclipse? Well, an eclipse is something when the moon passes in front of the sun, and it only happens really rarely. But if you try to stare up at an eclipse or watch it with your normal eyes, then you can get burnt. Your eyes can get burnt, because you should never look at the sun because it's too bright. And if you ever try to do that, you have to look away after a few minutes because it hurts. But sometimes if an eclipse is there and you're looking at it, it's shielding the sun from your eyes. And so therefore you can look a bit longer, but you should always look at it through a special device so you can see it. Okay, how do we know this book is set in America from the language? Well, there's lots of language in this first bit. Things like garbage bag, which is obviously a rubbish bag. What else was there? There were lots of things. Well, the mailboxes. So mailbox instead of postbox. And yeah, lots of language. And they were talking obviously in different accents. Her name is Mom rather than Mum. So there's lots of things you could say about that. Number 3, describe the incident with the shattered mailbox. Well, it's obviously out on his bike. Paul was out on his bike, and then he had a car behind him with somebody in it with a mask on, leaning out and tried to smash his head in, but he managed to duck and he smashed a mailbox. So the question is, do you think Eric was to blame? But how could Eric be to blame when Eric was at home doing his homework? But Paul was sure it was Eric, and the parents seemed to just sort of brush it under the carpet. They didn't seem to want to know anything about it. So that's quite suspicious, isn't it? But do you think Paul was imagining it? Maybe he was so scared. You could say that. Perhaps he was so scared and he doesn't really like Eric, does he? So maybe that's why he thought it was Eric. He might have been imagining it. We just don't know enough about the character yet, do we? Okay, right, we're going to go on to the first chapter of the book. Now, this book, it starts like this, part 1, and then it goes into days like this. It's a bit like a diary. So this first chapter is called Friday, August the 18th. So I'll start now. For Mum, the move from Texas to Florida was a military operation, like the many moves she had made as a child. We had our orders, we had our supplies, we had a timetable. If it had been necessary to do so, we would have driven the 800 miles from our old house to our new house straight through without stopping at all. We could have refueled the Volvo while hurtling along at 75 miles per hour next to a moving convoy refueling truck. Fortunately, this wasn't necessary. Mum had calculated that we could leave at 6 a.m. Central Daylight Time, stop 3 times at 20 minutes per stop, and still arrive at our destination at 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I guess that's challenging if you're a driver. Pretty boring if you're just sitting there. So I slept on and off until in the early evening we turned off Interstate 10 somewhere in western Florida. The scenery was not what I'd expected at all, and I stared out of the window, fascinated by it. We passed mile after mile of green fields overflowing with tomatoes and onions and watermelons. I suddenly had this crazy feeling like I wanted to bolt from the car and run through the fields until I couldn't run anymore. I said to Mum, "This is Florida. This is what it looks like." Mum laughed. "Yeah, what do you think it looked like?" "I don't know, a beach with 50-story condo on it." "Well, it looks like that too. Florida's a huge place. We'll be living in an area that's more like this one. There are still a lot of farms around." "What do they grow?" "I bet they grow tangerines." "No, not too many, not anymore. This is too far north for citrus trees. Every few years they get a deep freeze that wipes them out. Most of the citrus growers here have sold off their land to developers." "Yeah? And what do the developers do with it?" "Well, they develop it. They plan communities with nice houses and schools and industrial parks. They create jobs, construction jobs, teaching jobs, civil engineering jobs, like your father's." But once we got farther south and crossed into Tangerine County, we did start to see groves of citrus trees, and they were an amazing sight. They were perfect. Thousands upon thousands of trees in the red glare of sundown, perfectly shaped and perfectly aligned, vertically and horizontally, like squares in a million-square grid. One pointed, "Look, here comes the first industrial park." I looked up ahead and saw the highway curve off left and right into spiral exit ramps like ram's horns. Low white buildings with black windows stretched out in both directions. They were all identical. Mum said, "There's our exit right up there." I looked ahead another quarter of a mile and saw another pair of spiral ramps, but I couldn't see much else. A fine brown dust was now blowing across the highway, drifting like snow against the shoulders and swirling up into the air. We turned off Route 27, spiraled around the ram's horns and headed east. Suddenly, the fine brown dirt became mixed with thick black smoke. Mum said, "Good heavens, look at that." I looked to where she was pointing, up to the left, out to the field, and my heart sank. The black smoke was pouring from a huge bonfire of trees, citrus trees. I said, "What are they doing that for? Why are they just burning them up?" "To clear the land." "Well, why don't they build houses out of them or homeless shelters or something?" Mum shook her head. "I don't think they can build with them. I don't think those trees have any other use than for fruit." She smiled. "You never hear people bragging that their dining room set is solid grapefruit, do you?" I didn't smile back. Mum pointed to the right and said, "There's another one." Sure enough, same size, same flames licking up the sides, same smoke billowing out. It was like a Texas football bonfire, but nobody was dancing around it and nobody was celebrating anything. Then in an instant, in the blink of an eye, we crossed over from this wasteland into a place carpeted with green grass, with trees along both sides of the road and flower beds running down the middle of a median strip. We could see the roofs of big, expensive houses peeking up over the landscaping. Mum said, "This is where the development begins. This one is called the Manors of Coventry. Aren't they beautiful? Ours is a little further in." We went past the villas at Versailles, which, if anything, looked even more expensive. Then we saw a high grey wall and a series of wrought iron letters that spelt out Lake Windsor Downs. We passed iron gates and a pond of some kind. Then we made a couple of turns and pulled into a wide driveway. Mum announced, "This is it. This is our house." It was big, 2 stories high and very white, with aqua trim like a Miami Dolphins football helmet. A new wooden fence ran around both sides of the back, where it met up with the high grey wall. The wall apparently surrounded the entire development. The garage door opened up and with a smooth mechanical hum. Dad was standing in there with his arms open. He called out, "Perfect timing, you two. The pizzas got here 5 minutes ago." Mum and I climbed out of the car, stiff and hungry. Dad came outside, clicking the garage door closed. He put an arm around each of us and guided us towards the front, saying, "Let's do this right, huh? Let's go through the visitor's door." Dad led us through the front door into a tiled foyer, 2 stories high. We turned to the left and passed through an enormous great room with furniture and boxes piled all around it. We ended up in an area off the kitchen that had a small round table and 4 chairs. Eric was sitting in one of the chairs. He waved casually to Mum. He ignored me. Mum waved back at him, but she was looking at the boxes stacked in the kitchen. She said to Dad, "These boxes are marked dining room." Dad said, "Uh-huh." "Uh-huh. Well, I marked dining room on them, so the movers will put them in the dining room." "Okay, Eric will put them in there." He looked around at me and Eric. "Eric and Paul?" Mum asked. "Did the movers break anything?" "No, they didn't break a thing. They were real pros. Nice guys, too." Mum and I each grabbed a chair. Eric opened a pizza box, pulled out a slice and started stuffing it into his mouth. Mum said, "How about waiting for the rest of us, Eric?" He gave her a tomatoey grin. Dad passed out paper plates, napkins and cans of soda. Once Dad sat down, the rest of us started to eat. Everybody's mouth was full for a minute. Then Mum said to Dad, "So what have you been doing?" Dad wiped his mouth. "Work, trying to get organised up there, trying to get to see old Charlie Burns." He looked at me. "He's a real character. You have to meet him. Spends half his life at stock car races. He's crazy about stock car racing." Mum said, "You mean he's not really there? You can't get in to see him because he's not there?" "Right, he's not really there. He's up at Darlington or at Talladega or Daytona." Mum was concerned. "And that's okay?" "Oh, I don't know that it's okay, but that's the way it is. He's the boss. He makes his own hours. He told me I can make my own hours too." He looked over at Eric. "That'll be good for us. I'll be able to go to the football practices every day." I thought to myself, okay, here we go. How long did it take Dad to get to his favourite topic, the Eric Fisher football dream? I'd heard it all before, too many times, and I was about to hear it again. I tried to head him off by asking him about something, anything, but he was too fast for me. It's a great opportunity for you boys too. Eric will get the exposure he needs in the press. The Tangerine Times is crazy about high school football. And we're just down the road from the University of Florida. You know, the Gators. In fact, old Charlie is a big Gators fan. And Florida State and the University of Miami are far away. These big-time Florida schools like to draft Florida boys for their teams. That was that. I was off now into the Eric Fisher football dream. As soon as I got an opening, I said, "May I be excused? I'd like to go and find my bedroom." Dad said, "Sure thing, you're at the top of the stairs to the right. Eric's down at the other end, and you two have guest rooms in between, so you guys should never hear each other." I retraced my steps to the great room, went up the stairs, and turned right. I had to squeeze into my bedroom past a stack of boxes. I switched on the light and saw one had cool sheets written on it. I opened it and made up my bed. Then I found my computer carton and set it up on the desk. When I got around to putting my clothes away in the dresser, I came across a box that said Eric's Trophies. I felt a surge of anger. Mum's anger, as the moving guys for doing that. I picked it up and carried it to the top of the stairs. Eric was standing down in the foyer. He had the front door cracked open. He was talking to a group of kids, at least 2 girls and 1 guy, telling them that he would see them later. I got down quietly and hurried back to my room. I turned on the computer, got into my private journal and wrote until 11 o'clock. Then I lay down on the bed and fell asleep. But I woke up almost immediately. Someone was running down the hall. It was Eric. I heard him run down the stairs, go out the front door and pull away in a loud car. I couldn't get back to sleep. My mind started racing like an engine. I started thinking about our old house. Then I started thinking about a pissed off zombie, dragging 1 foot behind him, keeping to the right, taking his time, slowly, surely, stalking his way down Interstate 10. Okay, that's the end of the first chapter. I'm going to pause and then I'll screen share so that you can do the questions. Okay, we're going to go into the questions for that chapter now. So I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so here are the questions. So what I suggest you do is I'll read through them and then you pause and then you answer the questions in full sentences, please. And you can put a title there, Friday, August the 18th. And you can put page 7 because hopefully I'm going to try and get some of these books sent out to you so you can read along with me or read them yourselves. So number 1 question, what is a tangerine? Number 2, why can't tangerines grow in North Florida? You can always rewind the video and listen to that bit if you don't remember. Number 3, why were they burning the trees? Number 4, what was the new house like? Try and describe it for me. And what sport is Eric good at? Number 5. Okay, so pause the video here, answer the questions, and then we'll go through the questions after. Okay, so the answers to the questions, let's have a look. So what is a tangerine? Well, a tangerine is like an orange, but much smaller. I'm sure you've all had them. Sometimes they're called satsumas. They're very similar. And obviously they're very tasty and small. So tangerine is a fruit. Why can't tangerines grow in North Florida? Well, in the book, it said that it was too cold and the trees would die. So they decided not to grow them in North Florida. Why were they burning the trees? Well, when the crops had finished, they burn the trees so that they can regrow again and produce new crops. And I think Paul asked Mum whether they could use the wood for something else, and she said no, they could only be used for growing fruit. Number 4, what was the new house like? Well, it was big, wasn't it? Big and white. That's how he described it, like a football helmet, like shiny. And also, he said it was huge inside the huge rooms. Talks about going through big rooms, great rooms, up big staircases. So it's a much bigger house, big driveway, much bigger house than they had before. And number 5, what sport is Eric good at? Well, it's American football. And I think we'll go into that a bit more detail in the next chapter, which I'm going to read to you in a moment. Okay, the next chapter is called Saturday, August the 19th. That's the following day. I woke up in the dark to the sound of an explosion. I groped around for my regular glasses, unable to find them in this new bedroom upstairs in the new house. Then my glasses suddenly appeared on the nightstand, illuminated by a flash of lightning. I'd no sooner pulled them on when another explosion made the windows rattle and the walls shake. The lightning once again filled the room, painful and surprising, like the flash of a camera in my face. I waited for more explosions to follow, but none did, and I fell back asleep. I woke up again at 7, still wearing my glasses. I walked down the stairs, unbolted the front door, and stepped out into the morning air. It wasn't what I expected. The air had a grey tint to it and a damp, foul smell like an ashtray. Smoke, I thought. Something around here is on fire. I walked back inside and turned left towards the sound of a television. Mum was sitting on a stool at the high counter that separates the kitchen from the rest of the room. Mum, I think something's on fire around here. What? Where? Step out front and take a look and smell the air. Mum slid off the stool and hurried out the front door. She made it as far as I had when the smoke stopped her in her tracks. Where's it coming from? She cried, shuffling back in her bedroom slippers. She stared at the top of the house, looking for flames. I don't know. I'll check around back. I pulled my t-shirt up to cover my mouth and nose and ran off into the blowing grey smoke. I circled completely around our new house, but I couldn't see the source of the fire. Mum was on her way back inside. I'm calling the fire department. What about Dad and Eric? Should I wake them up? They're up already. They're up and out. They went to Gainesville to look at the football stadium. Gainesville? That's where the University of Florida is, honey. Oh, I guess we don't need to save them then, I said as I started to feel the walls for heat. You know, it could be electric wire inside the walls. It could smoulder for a while in there and then burst into flame. It could, Mum replied in horror. She snapped up the portable phone and dialed 911, talking as she followed my hand's progress along the wall of the great room. The builder of this development certainly should have known how to wire a... Hello? Yes, I want the fire department. Oh, Paul, what's our address? Lake Windsor Downs. What is it? Run outside and find the house number. I sprinted out, read the black numbers over the garage, sprinted back in and shouted, 1225. But Mum had already dug out a contract and was reading into the phone. 1225 Kensington Drive Gardens, Lake Windsor Downs. What? Where is it? Oh, it's in Tangerine. It's just outside of Tangerine. Mum listened for another 10 seconds into the phone. What more do you need to know? It's the place with smoke pouring out of it. Get somebody out here. She listened again. Yes, please hurry, and hung up. Resumed our search of the house and waited for the approaching wail of fire engines. 20 minutes later, Mum picked up the phone to call the fire department again as I peered out the front window. Wait, Mum, I shouted. I see them. They're on the other side of the development. Mum and I ran outside and watched an old fire engine cruising slowly up and down the streets. The fire engine turned in our direction. We waved and hollered and managed to attract our driver's attention. When the engine rolled up in front of our house and the driver got out, we saw that he was alone. He didn't look too much older than Eric. He had on a knee-high black and yellow boots, a pair of cut-off shorts, and a white t-shirt that had Tangerine Volunteer Fire Department, Wayne, written over the breast pocket. He waved to us and smiled brightly. You are the ones who called about the fire? Mum turned and pointed at our house. Yes, right here. The young man didn't move. Where's the fire at, ma'am? Mum directed her voice to him like a laser beam. You get in there and answer that question for yourself, young man. I called you 20 minutes ago. Is our house about to burst into flames or is standing out here? Any of your walls or doors feel hot, ma'am? No. Then I'd say you don't need to worry. You got a fire, just a bunch of smoke. You don't get a fire, just a bunch of smoke. Smoke? Smoke from where? Without a moment's hesitation, the young man's left arm shot up and pointed to the open field just beyond the wall at the end of our street. Right out there. It's the muck fire. It's the what? It's the muck fire, ma'am. The field probably got hit by lightning last night. Stirred up the muck fire. Last night? So how long is this fire going to burn? The young man laughed out loud and threw up his hands. It's been burning for as long as I can remember. Mum's mouth dropped. She stared at him in disbelief as he continued cheerfully. Muck fires don't go out. They're burning all the time. Burning right there under the ground all the time. Sometimes the rain will dampen down, but they're still smouldering. Y'all hear of lignite? Mum and I shook our heads dumbly. Wayne continued. Well, that field's full of lignite. Lignite is like one step before coal. There's hundreds of miles of it under there. Mum turned to me with a pure look of puzzlement. Well, I'm sure your father was never told about any of this. I'm sure the Homeowners Association will want to know about this. Oh, they know about it, ma'am. Lots of people call us when they first move in here. We wind up having to explain it to them. I watched Mum struggle to understand this. You explain it to them? Yes, ma'am. And then what do? The young man laughed. They learn to live with it, I guess. When the wind's up like this, they gotta stay inside, keep the windows closed. You're saying there's no way of stopping this fire? He shook his head. Late summer like this, if you want to stop the muck fire, you'd have to stop the lightning from striking. They ain't figured out how to do that yet. Watching this, I suddenly had to admire this Wayne fellow. He was restlessly cheerful, even in the face of Mum's rising anger. I knew she wanted to grab him by the ear and march him down to the field to put out the muck fire once and for all, but she couldn't. She couldn't do anything except turn to me once again and vow to bring this muck fire's situation to the attention of the Homeowners Association. You'll have a nice day, Wayne called. Mum and I turned together to look at him. With a happy wave, he climbed back into the fire engine and pulled noisily away. Okay, that's the end of a bit of that chapter. There's another bit in a minute. So I'm going to screen share the questions for you. And then if you pause, you can answer the questions. So the questions for this bit. Where was the smoke coming from? What is Mum like? So describe her personality, some of the things she's done, and who is Wayne? So pause the video now, and then you can answer the questions in full sentences, and then start again, and we'll talk about the answers. Okay, well, question number one, where was the smoke coming from? Well, Wayne, who we'll talk about in a moment, came to tell them that there was muck fires in a field nearby, and underneath the ground, they had something like coal that was burning all the time. So it was all hot under the ground. And when lightning struck, then the smoke started to come out of the ground. So apparently it happens all the time in Tangerine. Number two, what is Mum like? Describe her personality. Well, she sounds like she's a little bit moany. She's quite direct. She got really angry really quickly. She didn't like what Wayne had said to her about the fires, and she wanted something done about it. So she sounds a bit bossy, maybe a bit controlling. Who is Wayne? Okay, well, Wayne was the volunteer fireman who came to explain about the fires. And he was only young. I think he was described about the same age as Paul's brother. Okay, well, we're going to go on to the next part of this chapter, which is the last bit we're going to read today, which is Saturday, August the 19th, later, which is on page 17. Dad and Eric were gone all day. The house never did burst into flames, but the thermometer on the patio hanging there in the direct sun did climb to over 100 degrees. A vicious thunderstorm hit in the late afternoon and knocked out our power for about 10 seconds. That was just long enough to make Mum and me have to go around the entire house resetting all of the alarm clocks, VCRs, computers and stereos. After supper, I opened the garage door and walked my bike out towards the street. The air was hot and damp, but there was no smell of smoke. The wind was blowing west now towards the Gulf of Mexico. You can actually see the wind here. It whips around full of white construction sand, the sand that covers the streets and the unsold lots, the same white sugar sand that whipped through our development in Houston and the one before that in Huntsville. I turned left and pedalled against the sand towards the front of the development. Our street is about half filled with houses now. The development has grown from the west side to the east side, and we're on the last street before the east wall. Every empty lot on our street has a sold sign on it, though, so Lake Windsor Downs will soon be complete. I stopped at the model homes area, 4 houses surrounded by the same white picket fences, and pulled off my glasses to clean them. Lake Windsor Downs offers 4 choices to home buyers, each named after a British royal family: the Lancaster, the York, the Stuart and the Tudor. Mum absolutely loves that. I'm sure that's why we live here instead of in the estates at East Hampton or the manors of Coventry or the villas at Versailles. Mum will soon be describing people like this. They're the 2-storey Lancaster with the teal trim, or they're the white Tudor with the red tile roof. I replaced my glasses and started off again, riding parallel to the high grey wall. I stopped for a few minutes to watch two guys unloading thick squares of muddy sod from a flatbed truck. They plopped the squares down over the white sugar sand like pieces of jigsaw puzzle. When they pulled away, a new white Stuart had a new green lawn around it. I pedalled up to the iron gates. They opened onto a 2-lane entranceway with a cement island in the middle. There's a fancy little guardhouse on the island, like something that kings and queens in history would have built to keep out the serfs or the vandals or whoever. Isn't keeping anybody out now. It's empty inside, but I could see a dirty ashtray and a wastebasket full of soda cans. Just inside the entranceway is a big pond, Lake Windsor, I suppose. I started around it on my bike. It's perfectly round, a blue lake with a border of grass between the water and the road. I thought I heard a splash in the water, but I couldn't see anything moving. I rode completely around the lake in 1 minute and then headed towards home. As soon as I turned onto our street, I saw a black Jeep Cherokee parked in our driveway. A heavy-set man in shorts was talking to Mum. She was pointing at the top of our house and smiling. When I pulled up next to them, she was saying, "So naturally, I thought I'd see flames shooting out of the roof." The heavy-set man turned towards me and nodded his head in sympathy. "Yeah, well, when the muck fire starts up, it can be really stinkeroo. Hello, young man." "Hello, sir." "Paul," Mum said, "this is Mr. Costello. He's the president of the Homeowners Association. This is my son, Paul." I said, "Pleased to meet you." Mum added, "He lives in the brown and beige Tudor on the west side." I shook Mr. Costello's outreached hand and said, "I was just up at the lake just now." "Is that right?" He smiled. "Did you see any of the koi?" "The what?" "The fish. Koi, Japanese carp. They're like giant goldfish." No, I thought I heard something, but I didn't see any fish." "Get up there early in the morning and check out those koi. They're really something to see. We had them flown in from Atlanta. Stuck the lake full of them." Mum asked, "A lake? Is that Lake Windsor?" Mr. Costello laughed. "I guess it is now. It's not an official lake. It's man-made. Any new development like this has to have a retention pond for storm runoff. We decided to make the lake a centerpiece, a showpiece for our community. We stocked it with koi and had plenty of green space around it for strolling or even picnicking." He reached over and squeezed my elbow. "No fishing though, okay? Those koi are high-priced fish." Just then, Dad and Eric turned the corner and pulled into the driveway. As usual, when Eric appears, the attention switched from me to him. Dad and Mom started to tell Mr. Costello about what a great football player Eric is, but Mr. Costello was ready for them. He had a football playing son of his own, and he hopped into his Jeep Cherokee to go get him. They all wound up in the great room near the fireplace. I stood on a stool near the kitchen. Mr. Costello's son is named Mike. Mike and his father talked about football, the football program at Lake Windsor High, with a great deal of pride. Mr. Costello pointed out, "We've only had the program for 10 years and we've already surpassed the program at Tangerine High. No big school football players are coming out of Tangerine High anymore. The Lake Windsor Seagulls are now the dominant team in 3 counties. They're rewriting all the county record books." Dad said, "What position do you play, Mike?" Mike Costello spoke very well, like one of those football guys who made United Way commercials. "Coach Warner and Dad and I made a decision last year. Coach had enough linemen, but he had no backup at quarterback. He'd been working with me, and now I'm number 2 quarterback on the depth chart." Mike's father turned to Mum and explained, "Dad needed the backup to Antoine Thomas." But no one in the family needed to be told what number 2 on the depth chart meant. If Mum had chosen to, she could have explained to Mr. Costello what it really means. As backup quarterback, his son Mike would be handing the snaps and holding the ball for the place kicker, in this case, Eric Fisher, a place kicker who can hit with deadly accuracy from 50 yards. If Mum had chosen to, she could have explained to him that Mike Costello's backside would be featured in the local paper often as he held the ball for his new place-kicking sensation. But Mike was very friendly. He told Eric that he had heard about him already from the coach and that he was looking forward to working with him. Eric smiled and said, "So Coach Warner told you that you'll be my holder?" Mike answered, "Coach wants me in there as a holder so we can have that option. Either we can kick the ball or we can fake the kick and have me roll out and run or pass." Eric was still smiling, but he said, "Coach Warner knows what I can do. He can send anybody out there to pretend to kick a field goal. When I go there, it's for real." Mike shrugged and said, "That'll be the coach's call, won't it?" Eric locked eyes with him for a second. then backed off. Yeah, of course it will. I thought to myself, way to go, Mike. But I had to admit Eric was right. I heard Coach Warner talk to Dad enough to know that he's counting on Eric to be an impact player, a star. I guess part of that stardom will come at Mike's expense. I can see Mike Costello's future. I can see the Tangerine Times photos of the sensational senior place kicker, Eric Fisher, and his anonymous holder. Dad has the clippings from Houston of the sensational junior place kicker, Eric Fisher, and his anonymous holder, a kid whose name totally escapes me now. There will be no football glory in Mike Costello's future. But does Mike or his father really care? They certainly don't care the way Mum and Eric do, Dad and Eric do. Dad told them that he graduated from Ohio State, but he added that he always regretted not being big enough to play football there. Mike's dad told us he had graduated from FSU and from SFU School of Law. He didn't add that he regretted anything. Both Costellos seemed to be impressed by Eric. They both asked about his high school exploits back in Houston. They both admired the gold varsity ring on his hand. Dad boasted that Eric was the only sophomore in his high school year ever to receive one. Eric was as phony as he needed to be. He asked some questions about Lake Windsor's high school's student government and about its National Honor Society. He asked about early acceptance programs at different universities in Florida. Mike told us that he'd already been accepted into FSU School of Engineering, so I don't think he's too worried about his future in football or in anything else. Actually, he seems a pretty decent guy for a football player, but who knows? He's bound to change in one way or another once he gets caught up inside the Eric Fisher football dream. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. I've got some questions on that chapter, and then that'll be the end of this recording for today. Okay, let's look at the questions for that half of the chapter and the chapter. Let's see. Okay, so this is the second part of that chapter, the later bit. So these are the questions. Who were the houses named after? So on the housing estate where they lived, who were the houses named after? You can always rewind the recording so you can have a listen to that bit. Number 2, what position does Eric play in American football? What does he do for the team? And number 3, what is Eric like? Describe his personality. Okay, if you pause the video now and you answer these questions in 4 sentences, and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, question 1. Who were the houses named after? Well, they were named after 4 of the royal households. So let's see if I can find that bit. It was Lancaster, York, Stuart and Tudor. So it's all like the royal houses of the British monarchy. So the British royal family. And American people really like British history because they don't have as much history as we do. So they really like all that. So Paul said that his mum was really pleased they were living somewhere like that. Number 2, what position does Eric play in American football? Okay, well, he is the ball kicker, isn't he? So when they score goals, he's the person who kicks it over the bar to score a goal. So in American football, it's a bit like rugby. To score a goal like that, you have to kick it over these posts. And so that's his job. So he's like the star player that can score all the points. Number 3, what is Eric like? Describe his personality. Well, Eric seems a little bit obsessed with football, but probably because his mum and dad have been pushing him to do it so long. But he seemed a little bit arrogant because when Mike had asked him about the football team, he said, you know, well, the coach will definitely pick me to do this because I'm the best. So he's a little bit arrogant, isn't he? He's sort of full of himself a bit. And he's not very nice to Paul. I mean, we don't really see them interact very much, but when we do, it seems to be like, you know, rude gestures or snide names or things like that. So it's not a great relationship between the 2 brothers. Okay, so that's all for Tangerine Book this week. There's going to be another video on DB Primary for you to look at some punctuation this week. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Bye.